Welcome back. For the moment, let's put politics to the side here and look at the legal record of Judge Gorsuch. First of all, he's considered a solid conservative. If you saw the Times today, you saw this chart, and it puts him to the right of Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Alito, and even the late Antonin Scalia, with only Clarence Thomas listed as more conservative. His resume, by all accounts, stellar. Graduating from Columbia, Harvard, and Oxford, clerking for 2 Supreme Court justices, including Justice Kennedy, and he worked at the Justice Department. He's also considered a possible heir apparent to Antonin Scalia, strict interpreter of the Constitution, deep thinker, as well as gifted writer, and a solid defender of things like religious freedom and gun rights. For more on all this, let's bring in our guest, ABC News Supreme Court contributor Kate Shaw. She's also a professor at Cardozo Law School. Kate, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
First up, should we look at his nomination, or do you think the Senate looks at his nomination as a replacement for Scalia, or as just one of 9 justices?
You know, I think it's a great question. I think that the fact that he would be replacing Justice Scalia, I think under normal circumstances would mean he wouldn't face the same degree of opposition that he might face if this were, say, a vacancy created by Justice Ginsburg or Justice Breyer, one of the liberal justices. So even if confirmed, what he would do is restore the balance of power on the Supreme Court from before Justice Scalia's unexpected death. That said, the vacancy exists for this, against this backdrop of kind of the political calculation not to even give a hearing to President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland. And I think that Senate Democrats, many of them, believe this seat was essentially stolen from President Obama, who had the right to fill it. So I'm not quite sure how that will play out. So it is Scalia's seat, but it is a seat that they think should have gone to a Democratic president to fill.
You know, for even some of the most ardent Democrats who still are searing from what happened to Judge Garland, no one has disputed his qualifications. For those who follow the court, he is a judge's judge. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, his pedigree is impeccable. You know, it's interesting that he has this sort of elite pedigree. The initial list that then candidate Trump put out actually sort of broke the mold a little bit, had a lot of judges, who hadn't gone to Ivy League schools, who had slightly different career paths. He looks in his professional background a lot like the members of the current court, these elite pedigrees, this Supreme Court clerkship. He does bring a degree of geographic diversity, so the Colorado background is something we've got a lot of, say, New Yorkers on the court right now, and there isn't somebody from that part of the country, and the legal issues are somewhat distinct around water rights and those kinds of things, and, the sensibility is a little bit different. But I think it's fair to say he's absolutely a judge's judge, and again, under normal circumstances, he's the sort of person you can see getting overwhelming support and maybe pulling over some Democrats. He seems like a principled jurist, clearly a conservative, but that's what you would expect from a Republican president.
I talked some of the politics earlier this program with Senator Blumenthal, who's sitting on the Judiciary Committee, but play the parlor game with me. I've heard a lot of folks say this could be part of a domino effect. He clerked for Justice Kennedy. Kennedy has great affection for him. He looks at this and says, well, if Trump will go with this kind of a justice, I may be more inclined to retire sooner than later because I believe the next justice will fit the mold. Others say Kennedy relishes being that swing vote on the court, as he still would remain here under this makeup. If confirmed with Gorsuch, he'll stay on till the balance of the term as well. What are you hearing? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been a decent amount of speculation about Kennedy sort of contemplating retirement. I tend to agree with you that he holds an unbelievable amount of power right now, and, it's hard to see him necessarily wanting to relinquish that. He's in good health. He seems to enjoy the job. He's certainly up to it. I think that the Kennedy factor, I'm sure, figured into the calculation to select Gorsuch, both from the perspective that it's always about getting Kennedy's vote, so you think they have this personal relationship. Maybe Gorsuch will be more successful than, say, Justice Scalia sometimes was in actually pulling Kennedy over to that side. Justice Scalia didn't always succeed in doing that. And then I think to your other point, maybe Kennedy looks and says, okay, I can feel secure in who my replacement might be, or the sort of judge. I mean, the one exception, I think, that Justice Kennedy has a very powerful legacy on gay rights in the Constitution. And I think that a Justice Gorsuch would likely not side with him on those kinds of cases. And if he believes that that's a sort of central piece of his legacy that he wants to sort of cement, or at least not willingly kind of give away. You can imagine him staying as long as he can because of a fear, that he's, for the most part, sided on abortion cases with the court's liberals, and then on these important gay rights cases, he has both sided with the liberals and written the big opinions, and he may not be interested in giving up a seat to somebody who might be eager to overturn some of those cases.
Kate, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, let me bring in our panel as you do every Wednesday. Jim Kasur is a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. Doug Von Oist, founding partner of Carson Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct and selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLC and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office, and Mark Furnish, adjunct professor at the Elizabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. He's also argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. I know you're fond of the pick. Listen, it's hard-pressed for anyone that I've read who says he's not a qualified jurist. Forget about the resume and all the bona fides. He clerked for 2 justices. By all accounts, he's a brilliant jurist. The writings back it all up. But nonetheless, were you surprised he wasn't one of the original names that were put on the list from all the conservative groups? He was in the second round, they were saying.
Of the 21, yeah.
Young guy, 49. I mean, the seismic impact he could have on this court, given how long he could be on it for, right?
Well, he's very young, and obviously the longevity is a huge factor, but also he's an intellectual powerhouse. And, Trump is fulfilling his pledge of putting in a Scaliaite on the court, and he was clearly the closest of any of these 21 to Justice Scalia in terms of judicial philosophy, if not necessarily in terms of temperament. So I think he's a great pick, but in general, my view of this stuff is that if you're qualified, regardless of ideology, if you have the intellectual chops and the pedigree, you should be confirmed, and that goes for Garland, it goes for Bork, and it goes for Gorsuch, even though his judicial philosophy is more in keeping with my own.
Well, and he is considered, in the Times of the chart today that we showed earlier, Mayor, when he's far right of everyone, even Scalia, they were saying, with the exception maybe of Clarence Thomas in the court. Do you look at the makeup of the court and say, well, wait a minute, he's replacing Scalia, so you know what, that's fine. But if he were replacing, let's say, a more moderate justice or even a progressive justice that had passed, that's a different story. Does it matter to you which chair he fills?
No, there's no litmus test, and in fact, I agree with Mark. At the end of the day, if you put, first of all, the president has the prerogative of determining who he or she decides they want to set forth. If that person's qualified, then that person ought to be heard. There ought to be, barring something extraordinary, that person should be confirmed. Again, and also, as Mark said, it should have happened before. So right now, we should have a full bench. And then these determinations should happen if there's another vacancy. So unfortunately, politics quite often interferes with the ability of quite often good jurists' ability to even serve. They don't get heard. Politics comes in. There's nothing that says you have to replace a conservative with a conservative or a liberal with a liberal.
Somebody's going to have to step up and stop this, because we're never going to get anything confirmed. And Neil Katyal, the ex-Solicitor General, acting Solicitor General under Obama, a liberal, came out in the Times and said, we should support Gorsuch. That doesn't justify what they did to Garland, but somebody has to rise above this and stop it, because the Constitution says advice and consent. Right. And that's not what this is. This is obstruct.
It's just not going to happen. And the problem is the appearance to the country is that this entire process has become trivialized. Because
well, it is political.
It's political.
But
it's become politicized to a point where we had a nominee last year that was blocked for 9 months, and we sat with a Supreme Court that was, 8 instead of 9, and now you have a situation where nobody's even looking for qualifications. Nobody's even looking for what they're supposed to be looking at. They're just saying, we're going to block it because you blocked ours. And the appearance to the country, we just look
I will make a
foolish.
prediction that I don't believe that they're going to filibuster. There's already enough Democrats.
He's getting confirmed.
He will get confirmed, and I don't think, if you're the Democrats, you use your gunpowder here.
Well, they're going to save it.
I think they're going to save it.
The next one politically for them is the more important one, because this is just going to restore what it was when Scalia was on there.
It can't be exaggerated, though, Doug, the kind of cases that could come forward, and the push from some of the conservatives who felt that they've been on the sidelines for 8 years, a re-examination of gay marriage. Could Roe v. Wade be re-examined? Everyone trying to extrapolate from Gorsuch's writings that how he was against assisted suicide, that means preservation of life. Well, that goes to the beginning of life, not just at the end. And imagine if it goes from 5'4" to 6'3". So many different things at play right now.
Well, it's funny, everybody talks about his pedigree and his experience, but there's one thing that I don't hear people talking about is, does this guy have real practical courtroom experience and life experience? And I agree he's an intellectual powerhouse, he has an incredible resume, but I'd like to know practically, and I think that hearings
he
are
worked
important.
for a very top law firm, and actually when
I know a lot of people that work for a lot of top law
No,
firms.
no.
I want to know if this guy can actually.
and he worked in the
live
Justice
yeah,
Department.
He's ever seen a courtroom.
No, he's done everything.
And to you, because there's debate as to who should populate the court, and in recent years there have been arguments that people should have more life experience and not be lifetime jurists or whatever else, and follow the normal pecking order. Do you want somebody that had a robe on for a long time if they're going to be sitting there in the highest court of the land?
I mean, it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. If the person's a good judge, a good person, a practical person, then they're good. If they're not, we've all met good judges and bad judges.
I think the practical experience actually plays out more in the lower appellate courts. I did an argument in the First Department, and it really had to do with the judge's conduct and how it appeared to a jury in a courtroom. And part of my argument was, look, we've all been there. It doesn't look as strong on paper as it does when you're there, the effect of a judge's comments to a jury. The Supreme Court is a far more intellectualized situation where you want an intellectual powerhouse. I think it actually matters a
Breyer
little
is
bit
generally
less.
the pragmatist on the court. He brings that pragmatic perspective, and he will always, in determining a case, try to see where the equities lie and the practical impact of the case, and that drives his judicial flaws.
Roberts has surprised a couple times already. Some conservatives, certainly on the Affordable Care Act, have been disappointed by him. But is there a misnomer, Mark, when people say strict constructionist, that doesn't mean activist? They very well could be activists.
Absolutely a misnomer. It is folly to label these people, and we were talking about this off camera before we started. The labels of conservative and liberal, they just go out the window when you're a justice or a federal
Although
appeals
you can
court
close
judge.
your eyes and predict,
No, because
where will Scalia vote, where will Kagan
it's not
vote.
so much
where-
prediction.
But you couldn't
This
always
is,
do that even with Scalia,
this is
because
what
quite
we're
often, and we were
driving.
talking about that earlier, Scalia would come out with something that would be beneficial to the criminal defense bar. But the other thing is that there's a misnomer that when a judge comes up with a decision that person's an activist judge. The Supreme Court is replete with activist judges. If it wasn't, we'd still have slavery. If it wasn't, women wouldn't be able to vote. So they uphold all kinds of things, and ultimately they will take the pulse of the country, and they'll adjust accordingly, and they'll start to do things that would have never been considered previously.
Listen,
We've
you
talked
also
about
have
this
go
before.
ahead.
You don't know what he's going to be thinking in 10 or 15 or 20 years. We have seen Supreme
well, they
Court
changed.
justices
Stevens
evolve.
is a great example.
That's
Except,
right.
Or
except
tomorrow,
they
we don't even
believe,
know.
Right.
since Stevens and since Breyer, that there has been far fewer curveballs that have come down the
here's the
pipe
thing,
because of the fear that
Richie,
no one wants another Stevens.
You know, the
if you're a
public
Republican.
really doesn't understand how the Supreme Court works, and you'll hear Roe v. Wade ad nauseum throughout this process. There's a doctrine in the law that's called stare decisis, which roughly means respect for precedent. Gorsuch temperamentally, and as a human being, he may not like abortion, but it's very, very difficult to overturn a long-standing precedent, even if you don't like it, because that's built into the law institutionally. That's
And
how
he
the
has said
system
that.
works.
And he has said
They
that.
And it'll be
Scalia
fascinating,
didn't
the
overturn it.
confirmation hearings, and also, obviously, as it is the case, the politics. All right, when we come back, the issue that dominated the last 4 or 5 days here, certainly prior to the announcement of Mr. Gorsuch, and I'm talking about the travel ban. But people, they are fed up in a whole lot of places, and a whole lot of people in states are lawyering up. We're going to take a look at the legal issues involved straight ahead.